This is a video that is going to demonstrate how to construct and apply an exposed zipper. Just to kind of review what you need to make sure that you have a 7-inch either all-purpose or metal zipper. And I had a metal zipper here kind of in my random sewing drawers that I'm going to use. And then what you're also going to have is you want to make sure that you have your samples cut. We have our bodice back, which is where we're going to be placing this exposed zipper right down the center back seam. And you're also going to want to make sure that you have your stay already cut. And then I also have all of these markings, which are very light and kind of hard to see on the camera here, but I have all my my stitch lines, which are 1/8 away from my center line, and then my basting lines also just transferred over onto my fabric samples. So the first thing that we're going to want to do is I'm going to set this stuff kind of out of the way for the moment, and I'm going to want to stitch my with right sides together. Go ahead and place and stitch my stay in place. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to match up my center line markings, and let's see here. I'm going to go ahead and run a pin just right along that center line and see if I can get that to match up with my center line here. It should be right on that fold line. Alright, and what you might need to do is you might need to, lift up your sample every now and then to make sure that you're kind of hitting that, those alignments there. Now, it's not probably the end of the world if these aren't matched up perfectly with your markings, but just know that that you need to make sure that all of your stitching, when you go to stitch these down and into place, that that you have enough room around the outside, because we're going to stitch and then we're going to go ahead and slash this open. So the first thing that we want to do is kind of line up these center line markings, and it might be a little bit easier to see on this back side here because it shows up, especially on this area of my sample, that I have my 1/8 inch stitch lines marked. But for my stay, I want to go ahead and put a row of basting stitches around the outside of where my actual stitch lines are going to go, just to hold this stay in place. Alright, so again, I'm just going to be stitching, if I'm going to set this up right on here, I'm going to be stitching right where this basting stitch line is. So I'm going to go ahead and just increase my stitch length to 4. And then there's no need to do any back stitching when we do this. So I'm just going to go ahead and lower my needle and presser foot into that basting stitch line, and I'm just going to go ahead and attach these. And then when I get down to the end of that corner of the basting area, I'm just going to keep my needle in, rotate my fabric around, stitch across the bottom. And then when I hit that other marking, I'm just going to go ahead and just continue stitching right up the other side. And again, like these, staying in line with these markings are not the end of the world. It's just to mainly hold that fabric flat when we go to do our more permanent stitch lines, which is our next step here. Alright, And as you can probably see on my sample, mine are not perfect by any means, but it's being held in place. And so since I can see my markings a lot better on the back side of my fabric, I'm just going to just press my hands over the top to make sure that there are no ripples underneath, there's no bunched fabric. Then I'm actually going to sew my stitch lines from the back side, just because I can see my transferred markings a lot better. So the next thing that we're going to do is we are just going to now we're just going to change our stitch length to our regular 2 to 2.5, and we're going to sew along this stitch line that just is 1/8 of an inch away from our center line marking. So I'm going to go ahead and decrease my stitch length, and then on these I am going to back stitch, and I'm going to start about 1/4 of an inch away from the top of the, I'm going to go ahead and start 1/4 inch away from the top of that neck collar, just so everything is going to be finished there. And I'm going to do a little bit of back stitching to start this off. So I'm going to lower my needle and thread, making sure that everything is lined up. And I'm just going to do a couple quick back tacks and then go ahead and stitch this into place. And again, I'm following those markings as best I can. Not going too fast. I just want to make sure that everything is stitched down into place. Alright, and then again, when I get to the bottom, I'm just going to leave my needle down, rotate my fabric over, and then I'm just going to come right back up the other side. And I'm going to back tack when I get close to the end there. Then go ahead and raise up my needle and presser foot and trim my thread tails. So I'm going to go ahead and trim those thread tails now. Okay, so hopefully you guys can see my red stitch line, which is 1/8 of an inch away from my center marking line here. Alright, so the next step that I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and slash through both layers, so through both my my bodice layer and my zipper stay layer. So I have my scissors here, and I'm just going to cut through both of those right along that center front marking line. And I'm going to stop about 1/2 of an inch away from the end where I had kind of flattened off my stitch and then turn the corner. So I'm going to stop about 1/2 an inch away, and then I'm going to pick up my sample and I'm going to just angle my cuts into the corners there. Okay, so you can see that this is now opened up and I have a little flap tail there. Then the next thing that we're going to want to do is we're going to want to remove all of our basting stitches. So that's our next step, and hopefully these will come out fairly easy for you. See, like the whole purpose of these basting stitches was just to hold that fabric sample down flat while we stitched in our regular stitches. So I'm just going to go ahead and quickly remove these since they're not held down, and since we did have a pretty big stitch. What I might be able to do is just give myself a decent tail and then kind of gather up this fabric as much as I can, wrap it around my finger, and then pull out as much as I can there. Lay that back flat, maybe pick up a couple more threads. I'm going to go ahead and see if I can gather it up again, and then pull that thread out, and make sure I have my bobbin thread kind of cleared and out of the way. I'm going to see if I can go ahead and pull the other way out. Looks like it's a little short. Let's see if I can pull that out. Alright, make sure all my basting threads are now clear. And the next step that we want to do is we want to go ahead and turn our stay, our exposed zipper stay, to the inside of our sample, and then press that flat. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop the video, and you're going to want to press this seam flat, and then you're probably going to want to flip it open and then press the seam allowance towards the stay, and then flip it to the flip everything to the wrong side here, and just give it a good press, making sure that what we see on the front side is we don't see this seam at all. What we see is just a nice crisp folded back line. Alright, so I'm going to stop the video and I'm going to go press that, and I'll meet you back here to go ahead and install that zipper.